Prof, Ross, Ray, David, Malak, TH, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Now, some of you may notice that I've just addressed Tony Hedley as Prof. For the young, and there are actually quite a few young faces here, it may sound strange when it comes from the dean who holds a chair himself to call somebody else Prof. Let me explain. I belong to the old school, in fact, formatively educated in a 4th-century-old institution 15 minutes away by car from where Tony was born. I'm also Chinese, so by epigenetic inheritance, a natural Confucian. Therefore, I have a double dose of the respectful behavioral trait, especially towards senior colleagues, the elderly, and of course those who happen to be both. Now, joking aside, I'm really so pleased and frankly relieved that we have at long last been able to congregate in Tony's honor today. I shan't recall for all of you the extraordinary amount of planning and execution that has gone into having Tony with us here today. And for that we have many people to thank, but most immediately Dr. James Kong, who sits right in the front row here. As you can see, he has been tending to Tony's every need during the conference, but he actually especially flew to London to fly him back. So it's not every day that you can actually afford a senior surgeon to do medical flights across much of the Eurasian continent. Now, I still remember the first day I met Prof. In fact, it was also the first day I met the Undersecretary. I was finishing graduate school in America, and I flew back to town for my interview. In the room were 3 people, Tony, TH, and yours truly being the subject of interrogation. I remember TH appeared, where's TH? I remember TH appeared thoroughly bored throughout the hour-long chat. And it was really just a chat, mostly between Tony and I. And it seemed that just about the only things Tony was interested in had something to do with my Jesuit boarding school in the Pennine Hills of Lancashire, around which his childhood revolved until he, like me, was banished to a similarly austere Welsh institution. I do not remember having had to answer any more than a couple of substantive questions about public health. My CV then was wafer thin, with a grand total of 2 papers, neither of which I was the first or the last author. Frankly, I had and still have to this day no idea what he saw in me and why he decided to hire me. So I could only conclude that the only reason being that the department must have been really desperate then. And only later did I find out that the department had not been able to retain a single clinical lecturer for longer than 1 contract for the better part of 2 decades. And so I suppose that's really why I was hired. But whatever the reason, I remember Tony telling me at the conclusion of that interview that I was about to be his very first hire ever, whom he didn't know previously. Now, evidently, there are some customs one should never break with, sir. One afternoon, soon after I took up the lectureship, when I was completely overwhelmed, as usual, because I was, and for those of you who now teach in the School of Public Health, I was then teaching 363 hours in my first contact hours when I was first appointed to this department then. I don't think that any of you teach quite as much. In fact, it would take probably 4 of you to have the same number of contact hours nowadays. So I was absolutely knackered one afternoon and feeling utterly despondent about my future. I had been thinking to myself, what am I doing here? Why am I here, and what future do I have? I remember him coming into my room, sitting me down, and like a very stern, as always, but benevolent schoolmaster, said he saw little reason, young man. I can't see any reason why you will not get your chair within 10 years. So, shut up, stop whining, and wrap a towel around your head, grit your teeth, and press on. And then he left. I thought this guy was bonkers. And I thought, oh my God, he wasn't going to offer me a raise. He wasn't going to do anything real, but instead just gave me a lashing. But I was actually secretly delighted that his sweet words, even though they may really just be rhetoric, trying to keep me more than one contract. So I thought, okay, well, I will set my sights as he has set them for me. And if I may be excused for the 4 years I defected to the dark side, his prophetic judgment at the time was actually spot on. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this is to explain why and how Tony has been my single most important inspiration and motivation. I, in fact, owe my entire career to him. The many imperfections, however, are of course my own doing. I still remember he used to always come into my room and give me these little pep talks. He said, young man, you're going to finish the Part 1 exam in 1 year. And in one go, by the way. There's never been anybody in this department who has not passed it with one try. And you make sure that you don't break that. And I said, but sir, I'm teaching 360 hours this year. Well, take a week off just before the exam, and you'll just be fine. And I said, but how is one supposed to have the entire Part 1 curriculum done in a week? He said, well, but you already did a master's, so you should know all the materials already. The only thing you need to do is to read from cover to cover, Donaldson and Donaldson, and then regurgitate the whole thing during the Part 1 exam, and you'll be fine. So that was what he set me to do. And then after I actually passed my Part 1, he then said, he actually never said, well done. He said, okay, fine. One task accomplished. Next task, get your MD. And I said, oh, okay. And how might you wish me to do that? Well, I don't know. Didn't TH just give you the birth cohort? And he's going on holidays for 2 months. So while you're at it, doing the acting headship in your first year as a junior clinical lecturer during that summer, you should pump out 3 or 4 papers. And you only need about 5 or 6 for your MD. So that was his second task. And so on it went. And to this day, whenever I feel that work is becoming overwhelming, I still think of him. And then once I got my MD, then he set slightly higher bars. He said, young man, make sure you defend your MD well. The gold medal for the MD thesis in this university is called the Sir Patrick Manson Gold Medal. He said, look, if the community medicine department is going to field a candidate, you must go and get that medal. And by the way, and I really shouldn't be saying this now as the dean, and those of you from the Department of Medicine, shut your ears for the next 10 seconds. He said, by the way, the MD degree is controlled by the head of medicine, who is perennially biased against us. And you won't ever get it unless you're 3 times as good as the next candidate, which is probably from that department. So you make sure that you defend well, and you go and get it, boy. And so after that, then he said, you know what? And this was much later. This was actually when I was considering whether to throw my name in for the deanship. He said, I remember he said to me, actually from his hospital bed, he said, the last time this medical school had somebody from our discipline as dean was during the time of Michael Colborne's headship. He did it for a couple of years, and the first time that, or the only other time we had a public health practitioner do this was our founding dean, Patrick Manson. Of course, the discipline wasn't even born then. So he said, you go and make public health proud. And that is why I say I owe my entire career to Tony. I have admired Tony's work so much that I've tried, mostly in vain, to model my own development on his legacy. He's lived the very qualities of what is hard to find in, and I quote him, a jobbing public health physician nowadays, who's a generalist with a strategic command of the full ecoscape of all that matter to population health, but one who can at once become a competent, even expert specialist in a specific domain when called upon, mostly by circumstance, but sometimes by choice. Earlier this afternoon, we have all heard from fellow colleagues in the various fields how Tony reached the scientific pinnacle of health services research, tobacco control, and environmental epidemiology, while firmly tethered to the contextual relevance for the Hong Kong public's health. Now, writ large beyond public health, such a renaissance quality is a rarity in today's world of super specialization and the Fordian reductive approach apparently to home perfection. In an age past, such personalities were less difficult to find, given the world they lived in allowed, even celebrated, their many splendid achievements. Leonardo da Vinci was perhaps the most familiar Renaissance man in all senses of the word. Much ink has been spilt on this archetype of Renaissance humanism, so I shall desist. Rather, allow me to preach a little about Thomas Young, who has been described as, and I quote, the last man who knew everything, in a full-length biography entitled the same. Now, Thomas Young belonged to the era when it was still possible to master several apparently disparate disciplines, hence the definition of a polymath. Young was born in the late 18th century, 4 centuries after the Italian Renaissance began, and about 100 years into the Enlightenment, after Bacon, Hume, Kant, Locke, and Newton. Now, I picked Thomas Young as subject for discussion here because, first, he was a fellow medic and one who worked at St. George's, no less, like our guest speaker Ross Anderson still does. Not only was Thomas Young an expert practitioner of physics, for instance, his eponymous rule, Young's rule, for calculating pediatric dosage is still in use on pediatric wards everywhere, including Hong Kong today. But his contributions to physics dwarfed his achievements in practically all the other fields in which he excelled. When one is complimented by one giant of the field in a commentary on another great man, need one say more? Einstein, in his foreword to the 4th edition of Newton's Optics in 1931, wrote, and I read the following quote for you. This was written by Einstein. Fortunate Newton, happy childhood of science, nature to him was an open book, whose letters he could read without effort. Reflections, refractions, the formation of images by lenses, the mode of operation of the eye, the spectral decomposition, and the recomposition of the different kinds of light, the invention of the reflecting telescope, the first foundations of color theory, the elementary theory of the rainbow passed by us in procession, and finally come his observations of the colors of thin films as the origin of the next great theoretical advance, which had to await over 100 years, the coming of Thomas Young. Need I say more about his achievements? Young's famous double-slit experimental setup, which all of us would have practiced in high school physics laboratories, in fact presaged quantum mechanics. Young's modulus, you remember, on Hooke's law of stress and strain is another fundamental classic. His three-color theory of retinal cones was rediscovered and expanded upon by Helmholtz into the Young-Helmholtz theory. Now, another reason why I selected Thomas Young in this tribute to Tony was because both shared the same work ethic. Tony was still taking notes in his notebook as all of you were speaking earlier on. Mary Somerville, after whom Oxford Somerville College was named, described a telling anecdote about Thomas Young. One night, she had been stargazing with her husband and another couple from the balcony of their London home until 2 a.m. when they happened to notice a light in the window of Young's house, which was across Welbeck Street. Out of curiosity, the party crossed the street and knocked on Thomas Young's door at 2 a.m. in the morning. I don't know if one does that nowadays. Thomas Young came down in his dressing gown and invited them into the house, wherein they were shown a Ptolemaic horoscope that Young was translating by burning the midnight oil. Now, I still remember Tony's frequent complaint about my office lights in room 511 upstairs as he looked out from his study window at Tam Towers, probably after stargazing into the wee hours too. He has spent countless hours, as you've heard from Richard Fielding just now, scanning the night skies over the South China Sea through his many telescopic lenses from the vantage point of his balcony. The difference between Somerville and Hedley was that Tony would start burning the midnight oil after appraising the heavens. How else could he have noticed my office light from his balcony? And by the way, I actually only have my light on because I knew my boss would be nosy enough to look. What he, of course, did not realize, and never did, I don't think, he never trained his telescopic lens to my window. So he could actually never tell whether I was actually in my office or not. Now, just let me digress a little bit. You see, I seem to have a lot of people interested in my work habits. The undersecretary who sits next to Tony today used to feel very happy whenever, because we live upstairs, downstairs from each other, also in Tam Towers. She would actually take it as pride and joy if in the morning my car was still in the parking lot when she got up to work, thinking that I was actually still sleeping. Now, of course, what she didn't realize was that there is such a thing called the computer at home and flexible work arrangements. So I'm so very glad that both the Undersecretary and Tony here are so fascinated with my work hours and my work habits. Now, back to Thomas Young's fascination with the land of Ptolemy. His epitaph in Westminster Abbey says it all, and I quote, "He was the man who first penetrated the obscurity which had veiled for ages the hieroglyphics of Egypt." However hyperbolic my rhetorical flourishes may seem, I wouldn't begin to draw parallels between Tony's facility with languages with Thomas Young's towering contribution to deciphering the Rosetta Stone, which he did. Nevertheless, Tony indeed has always had a love for the Far East, as opposed to the Near East for Young. Whether it be Fiji, so if you actually turn to that collage of photographs, you will see a topless Tony Hedley in his youth. That's actually a photo of him on one of his excursions as a WHO consultant to Fiji. Or Konkan in northeast Thailand, a picture which you saw with David Spiegelhalter. where the medical dean today, actually 2 weeks ago to be precise, still remembers Tony's intervention during the foundation of their school decades back, as well as his ongoing involvement as external examiner. I was meeting with their dean in Bangkok, Thailand 2 weeks ago, and they still speak very, very fondly of Tony. In fact, they were very much looking forward to his visit, which he had been planning to do after Hong Kong. Now, it's not easy being a polymath, and a public health polymath at that. Just ask Tony. He's a superb raconteur of the not infrequent snubs and sniggers he, or indeed anyone who happens to be a public health polymath, has had to endure. Yet, our honorant today deliberately chose to give up a hugely promising endocrinology practice as a master physician to venture into the no man's land of public health medicine. Ours is a discipline that doesn't even seem able to come to a consensus on what we're about. No medical specialty has undergone more changes in nomenclature than ours. It began with public health, then it became social medicine, then community medicine, then community health, then public health medicine, and then back to public health again. And most recently, population health, if you happen to be Australian and New Zealander, or its close cousins, global health and planetary health, if you happen to be megalomaniacs like the editor of The Lancet. Being a medic who chooses to specialize in public health, and there are many here I can see, is often blasphemous enough, let alone one who dares to penetrate disciplinary walls. I should think the following alliterative verse by Thomas Young would find echo with Tony's experience. Medical men my mood mistaking, most mawkish, monstrous messes making, molest me much. More manfully my mind might meet my malady. Medicine's mere mockery murders me. At such great reputational risk of being labelled a dilettante who dabbles without real commitment, or worse, real knowledge, why do true polymaths who could have led a much more leisurely existence with a singular focus choose otherwise? Now, for some, I suppose it would be because they can. Others, perhaps due to intellectual attention deficit that doesn't otherwise interfere with the depth, thus quality of the profound insights into diverse fields. And it might actually interest you that Tony might be one of them because he's actually taking some Ritalin today. Still others, it must be a vocational calling to do what is right for the times. For most, it is probably some combination thereof. It appears to me, however, that the greatest and most admirable reason to purposefully exploit and necessarily labour over one's polymathy, inherently God-given, or to the secular-minded a product of the random elegance of life, must be the ultimate ideal of consilience between the different ways of knowing. The metamorphosis of different and diverse fields is but the constant evolution of how different branches of knowledge tend towards the universal truth in the natural philosophies governing the human condition and our environment broadly defined. And unless this evolution is from time to time punctuated by genius polymaths who would weave together apparently different strands of discourse into a unitary panorama, truly transformative change cannot happen. Borrowing the words of Thomas Moore, the Irish bard, bon vivant and rebel-rouser, in his poem, The Devil Among the Scholars, here is to AJH and his ilk of public health polymaths. Off I fly, careering far in chase of polys, prettier far than any of their namesakes are, the polymaths, the polyhistors, the polyglots, and all their sisters. Prof, you have taught and inspired generations of jobbing public health doctors to take flight, as you have literally done along the Shekong airstrip in more carefree days, despite your otherwise impeccably green record. In turn, your mentees have made you proud and done tremendous good for the public's health. The tracks have literally crisscrossed the globe, from the British Isles to the subcontinent, from the Pacific Islands to the most precious pearl in the South China Sea, from the Siam Kingdom to the Antipodes. They've excelled in fields as diverse as environmental epidemiology, global health, health economics, health informatics, health professional education, infectious disease epidemiology, non-communicable disease control, the politics of health, primary care, public understanding of science, and of course, tobacco control. The list goes on. The indelible imprints they have left have been worthy of your labours. You must feel proud. Finally, on a personal note, Prof, from the moment you gave me my first opportunity in the department to your most recent testimonial for my deanship appointment, no less while undergoing treatment in a Liverpool hospital bed, you have been nothing short of a guardian angel, a guiding light, and a grumpy, but perhaps always gracious role model. All of us, your students, trainees, mentees, and friends, will as ever remain indebted, grateful, and humbled by your humanity. Thank you and keep well.